Good morning again. So we have seen, of course, America's public investment really funding for decades innovation, science, and now with these multi-billion-dollar cutbacks when it comes to universities, research funding. How's that changing the landscape, right, is a real question. So Trevor, maybe I start with you because you're at the forefront of biotech innovation. What are you seeing?
Yeah, the funding environment's been pretty garbage for the last couple of years. I think for biotech and I think deep tech generally, it's pretty correlated with interest rates overall. Deep tech, you can earn a lot of money, but it's many years in the future. And when it gets discounted back, it can be pretty brutal for you. It's getting a lot better now. I think it's interesting. We were talking before coming out here, I think there's the haves and the have-nots. For example, like certain biotechs with some kind of AI story or certain subsectors of biotech that are very hot. There is a lot of money available, but then kind of the rest of the space starves in many ways. And I think it's a bit of a problem overall for the field.
When we're talking about starving science, can somebody else take that place, whether it's another government or private fund, Soo Boon?
Well, I think that it's actually a lot of money, particularly in Silicon Valley. So today you say that AI, all the money goes there, but then there's also the AI infrastructure and all that. So I think there's a lot. I think the one that is slowing down, in my view, is actually the drug discovery. However, if you're using AI to enable drug discovery, I think that's a very good thing. So it's a combination of two industries coming together. So I feel that this cut maybe is necessary, but they don't have a number to say how much they actually cut, right? So everybody is like panicking. So of course some universities are suffering more than the others. So I think generally I'm quite positive about private sector money coming in, especially in the US. You have all the rich people, the philanthropy, and I think there's the money that's going to flow in. And in the world, money seems to be plentiful. Question is,
the plentiful capital out there. It's interesting talking about the haves and have-nots of AI, because is that another challenge for biotech when you had that slump and the recovery still not there because of course, the funding, a lot of that capital is going to AI and anything related to artificial intelligence at this point?
Yeah, but also AI could be a bubble, but the bubble is at a higher level now. So I think it's important to know where the AI is applied, what application that will be. In any case, I think there was so much dollar that goes into the research over the last zillion years, and there are so many patents out there. I think the bottleneck is not the money. The bottleneck is the commercialization in the market, right? So now, with this opening up, then there's a lot of things that in Europe, in Asia, other countries can participate. We always forget about, in Asia, we have the semiconductor manufacturing operation. And it's because US don't have that part, but US have the creativity. It came from US. And then over time, they decided that they don't want to do manufacturing because this is too hard. So the Taiwanese, TSMC is there. Japan was leading in the 80s. Korea, what about those countries?
So Trevor, do you see the opportunities in other regions?
Yeah, I mean, it's an opportunity and a threat, I guess, in the current geopolitical environment. I think in general, right now, the US is still the biotech leader. I don't know if you'd agree with that or not. I think it's true. But I think we are in that journey that you mentioned on semiconductors. I think 5 years from now, the US if current trends continue, we won't be. I think it was like a couple of years ago, 25% of clinical trials were run in China. Today it's like 50%. In a couple of years, it'll probably be like 75, 80%. And that's just like the facts on the ground. And that's for a large variety of reasons. I think one of them being the different regulatory environment. I think another one being the amount of capital that's being put across like all parts of the industry, not just certain parts like AI-enabled drug discovery. And there's not anything necessarily wrong or right about that. It's just a geopolitical situation. But I think we are kind of sleepwalking into it. And I think the US has done that for a lot of industries. And then once it happens, we kind of try and claw our way back, whether it's like semiconductors or I was listening to the nuclear panel before this. And we have an opportunity to do something about it. And I don't know if we will. Yeah.
Especially also when it comes to building up the talent pipeline, right? That takes decades to build.
But if you look at Silicon Valley, the talent comes from all over the world. So it's not American. But it's the environment that facilitates that process, right? So a lot of countries, they are trying to copy, but they are not successful because the government still want to control. So Silicon Valley is just a magical place. So the question is that which country, whether it's Singapore, Japan, Korea, and China, obviously, you know, they were able to copy very fast. So Europe, obviously, you know, now if the Europeans are going back to Europe to do it, why not? Europe could be another center of excellence. Because a lot of technology basically came from there before, right? And the EU, they have the Horizon program. And, you know, I was looking through and I was like, wow, this is fantastic. Nobody heard about the Horizon program, or at least I have not heard too much about Horizon program. So maybe now with the flux of people going back to Europe, then, you know, there's more center of excellence.
Yeah, I think that's the number one thing that we have going for us in the US that we kind of maybe are messing up right now. I'm not sure. We'll see over the next 5 years because it's really hard to reverse. And that's that the US does attract talent from around the world. Like great inventions can come from people from any country, but we're very fortunate in the United States that they choose to come to Silicon Valley, to other places in the US, to be educated, to invent things. And then often they stay to found companies, often to the frustration of their home countries, probably Singapore included. And I think that's like part of the US's superpower. And I don't know if we fully appreciate that in the US, because with things like cuts to government funding for education, things like kind of making it really hard for some foreign nationals to get visas who are incredibly educated that want to found companies in the US, it is probably music to the ears of many countries in Asia. And you know, it's great for those countries. They're having really awesome scientists go back and found biotech companies, and I think it can be great for their home countries. But as you know, patriotic US citizen, I think it's the dumbest thing we could possibly do.
I was going to say, I mean, is Silicon Valley the magical place that you talked about still now? But do you see that at risk?
Yeah, I think we take it for granted. I think it still is. I think by far, I think many countries have tried to replicate the magic of Silicon Valley. My personal thesis on that is that really Silicon Valley is just a network effect of people having seen people that look like them, that come from a variety of backgrounds, having succeeded. There's no like secret governments. In fact, the US probably supports startups less than any other country on earth. Like so many countries have like sovereign wealth funds and things that are constantly, you know, getting free space, and the US is like, oh, we're not going to do anything for you. But Silicon Valley thrives.
Right.
And I think it's because there's all these examples of companies that made it, that IPO'd, that were successful, that built drugs. And then the founders of those companies, importantly, stay in the region and reinvest and inspire the next generation. And it's really tough to get that from a zero start. So if the US loses it, we'll be in the same position as everyone else in trying to get that restarted. And it's really, really hard, really hard.
Well, I guess US, you know, even the current government, they can change their mind, you know. 3 months ago was this policy. And then the trade barrier, you can delay another 1 year. So people will change their mind.
Who's the closest out there to becoming the next magical place?
I don't think there is one magical place. But obviously, China is already, things are happening for the last 20 years. So, you know, even you restrict them for not giving them the chip or whatever, they will find a way to do it. If it's not China, it's Japan. You know, if not Japan, it's Korea. And it's Africa countries, who knows, right? Because innovation can be anywhere. The question is that if the foreigner are educated in the US, and then they have the Silicon magic, and then they start going back to their own country, and the magic will happen over there. And that's a good thing for the world.
The different systems, though, especially state-owned IP in China, for example, is that a barrier, though?
Actually, IP is useless, if you ask me. With AI, look at AI. With AI, I think less funding actually is better. It's opportunity for business people. So if the family office, instead of investing in buildings, they invest more in the technology and benefit the rest of the people who don't have that much.
Yeah, I think the risk reward with like a Chinese style system as like an outsider looking in, it seems like the super powered side of it is that they can really, if they like an industry, they can just back up the dump truck and dump money into it in a way that we don't do in the US. And it seems like deep tech seems to be a big focus, whether it's semiconductors or nuclear or biotech. That's an area where in the US I don't think we're as focused, but in China it's very clearly a focus of building like a very robust biotech industry. I think the challenge and maybe the frailty on the other side of that is that when an industry goes out of favor, it just goes like the education startups in China just boom, like basically wiped out overnight just from a simple policy change. Whereas places like the US are robust to that. And I think, entrepreneurs recognize that. So that I think there is like some risk discount probably to the money dump trucks that are backing up. But at the same time, it's just tough to combat ecosystem where there's a more permissive regulatory environment and there's like just gobs of capital going into like all sorts of companies like across the spectrum. And I think the US has to think about, the current trends are that China is becoming more and more of a biotech superpower versus us. If we do nothing, that will continue. I don't necessarily know what the right answer is. I can come up with like 5 different suggestions, but we have to do something unless we want just the status quo to continue of us falling behind.
And Soo Boon, you also thought Japan was an innovative place when it comes to at least drug making.
I think Japan has gone to sleep for the last 30 years.
Is it waking
I
up
remember
finally, or are they still
in
asleep,
the days,
you think?
Sony Entertainment, they were on top of the world. Everybody was like, okay, Japan is going to take over, right? But they didn't. They just went passive. And I love Japan because it's such a good place to travel. People are so polite. And I think the moment you turn them on, they should have to do it themselves. I know because I was talking to, Jetro, and then because we also both invest in US and also Southeast Asia. So Jetro and Tokyo Stock Exchange, they have a concentrated effort in Singapore. So trying to encourage Singapore company, basically Southeast Asia company, to go to Japan, and Japanese company to come to Asia, because it's much nearer, right? But many of the Japanese companies, they are very comfortable in their own place, and they got a lot of funding. Government has many fundings for the startup company. So the question is, the moment they say yes, then all will come. Japanese is more, but I think the younger people are, changing the pattern.
I think that's a really good point because, I think often the comparison of like US and China, the comparator is drawn with like US and Japan like 20 years ago. And obviously, I mean, to your point, I don't think, Japan has overtaken the US on any of these metrics. I think the thing that concerns me though, going back to the, headliner topic a little bit, is that we are cutting the research funding in the US. And one statistic that kind of worries me or scares me even is that one thing that never happened with Japan, even kind of the heyday, is that if you look at like the rankings of universities and you look at where the top research is coming from, Japan never really outranked the US. But actually now China has like most of the top 10 spots for like university rankings in science and technology. Like Stanford's not even in the top 10 now. And if you look at who's publishing in like the top journals like Nature, Science, Cell, it's like starting to be dominated by things like Chinese Academy of Sciences. So on the one hand, hey, look, great science coming from anywhere. I think it's quality work. It used to be you could kind of write it off as like, oh, this is just also ran or things like. No, I think there's real creative work coming out. On the flip side, I think that's a real warning sign of like, okay, right where we're starting to get kind of knocked out a lot of these rankings that I think are meaningful. We're starting to cut funding, so that's only going to accelerate that trend. So I worry it's not really a US-Japan situation. It's truly different, because I think that was like a little bit of a false alarm to US science.
Is the center of gravity now shifting to Asia?
I think, absolutely, for scientific research,
Yes.
When it comes to some of the funding out there, especially from the private sector, Soo Boon, I know that you've talked about family offices and philanthropy potentially stepping in, but they've been more active in the US when it comes to biotech and scientific research. Could a new educated younger generation in Asia turn their attention to funding these innovations?
I think for the younger generation, they probably are willing, but they are not in the driver's seat yet, because there's generation change of wealth. And the first 2 generations of Asian wealth came mainly from the traditional industry. So they need to see something that is physical.
Like
something
property.
that is a software. What is a software, right? But only when they make money, then they say, oh, I want to invest in this, So, you know, I met people, it's like, oh, can you find me a deal, 10x return? I said, by the time I find you a deal, 10x return, already done, but I can't tell, you know. It can go into 0, it can go into 20x. So, you know, so the culture need a long time for the Asian family offices, I would say. Because traditionally, they want to protect everything for their family. So what is miracle to me is that the American, the family offices, they actually started years ago already investing in venture capital and all that. And they don't just think about my family, you know. Like you look at Bill Gates, you know, all the donations that's going up is amazing. So that culture is, you know, very difficult to duplicate in Asia. So maybe that's the thing that we should start educating.
Do you see the difference in culture as well when you come to Asia and you talk to investors?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, the good news for like healthcare and deep tech is that I think it's like a core human desire, need. It's like a cool thing generally. So I think that there's a lot of interest in the space. I think it really does come down to that historical experience doing it, because especially deep tech, I mean, you got to lock up your money for like 10 years, and like, yeah, I can go to 0, or I can like 100x. It's just a very high kind of risk-reward proposition. So.
Will artificial intelligence change the game, especially when it comes to shortening that time frames when innovation actually leads to commercialization?
Yes.
Yeah, given the amount of money put in, we better hope it does. Yeah, I think the part that everyone's kind of more public about is the what I call preclinical part. So that's kind of like finding the new drug candidate, and that's super important. But I think the area that it could have maybe an even more immediate impact is in the clinical trials themselves. Because if you're spending, I don't know, $20 million in 2 years on the preclinical work, you're probably spending like $800 million in 7 years on the clinical work. And a lot of that clinical work is actually perfectly suited to just like standard elements. It's like paperwork, it's forms, it's like very hundreds of pages of documentation. So I have pretty high hopes that across the spectrum, but especially on the clinical trial side. Yeah.
I want to ask a question to both of you. So as we're wrapping up this conversation, how do you fund the next wave of discovery, but do it responsibly, where you're actually balancing, of course, the commercial need, but also with purpose, and really leading to scientific innovations that will change the world?
Well, I think...
It's a very difficult question for 1 minute, right?
Well, for scientific, I think it will continue. I don't think that is going to stop it, because I think I'm very positive that private money is coming in, because AI is going to speed up the time of development for, you know, scientific discovery to be more commercialization. I think AI, I'm looking at also AI, how they actually can help, you know, movie industry to digitize, to speed up the whole process of the workflow, and even for storytelling, that normally you need to have movie producer and all that, and that is going to change the landscape. And recently there are phenomena happening. I think one of the speakers was here, microdrama, and that's really very popular, and that is going to create a lot of economic benefit for emerging countries as well.
Yeah, I think you have to have all the facets. I think if you don't have the government funding, or you don't have the private funding, or you don't have the like Bell Labs of the future, you're just going to miss out on different parts of the innovation cycle. So I think my big thing is that you can't lack any of them. If you want to have like a healthy ecosystem, you can't just assume private funding will make up for government funding. They have their own unique things that they work on. Yeah.
Thank you both for the conversation. And thank you so much for joining us.